Welcome back. It is now time for Forum Daily's weekly energy update with Dan McTeague, Senior Petroleum Analyst at gaswizard.ca. Take it away.
Well, thank you for that, Nima. And what a weird week it's been. Another roller coaster ride on the energy markets. Most people in Canada are reeling from what is, a pretty significant increase in places like Ontario and Quebec, a 20-cent increase by Saturday. So tomorrow we could see prices in places like Ontario hit $1.81, Montreal $1.97, same for Quebec City. The Maritimes are going to have to play catch up, of course, because of these large increases. They're likely to see in Newfoundland, for instance, prices move to the $1.90 range for gasoline, and of course a little bit less for Nova Scotia and New Brunswick PEI. As for the prairies, it looks like they're still staying pretty much range bound between $1.70 and $1.85. But just as we're looking at these prices making these increases, we're also looking at pressures on the market pushing down those prices. I'll get to that in just a moment. But Vancouver, of course, now back up above $2 a liter, with Victoria not far behind at 204, 205. The rest of the province hasn't really seen much of a change in British Columbia. We're still between $1.80 and $1.90 a liter. I'm not expecting much of a change there, but I am looking and sensing that markets are really in a bit of a frustrated position. They have been finally looking at fundamentals, supply and demand, and they realize that as we're heading closer to winter, demand for oil, heating products, oil, furnace oil, diesel, jet fuel, and the like are going to continue to see upward pressure at precisely a time, especially in the eastern part of the North American continent. So US East Coast, Canadian West East Coast. You're going to see a bit of a shortage in heating fuels, and that could lead to worst case scenario, not only high spiking prices, but potentially rationing of those prices of those products. We'll have to wait and see where it is. But one thing's pretty clear. I think some are starting to wake up to the idea that the federal government taxing heating oil is not exactly a very savory policy. In fact, it's one that is just downright mean-spirited. And no matter how you try to cake it or blend it with the idea that somehow it's all good for the climate, I think most reasonable Canadians are concluding very quickly that a tax that prevents them from staying warm in the winter is in no way, shape, or form going to stop the intensity of a hurricane, whether it's now or 10 years from now. But that aside, I think there is a growing concern and recognition in Canada that not only is this badly and adversely impacting Canadians, driving up inflation, reducing our purchasing power, destroying the value of the Canadian dollar, it is also at the same time forcefully going to remind the Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, that things are not as well as they thought it would be and that we are heading towards a recession. Much of that created by our obsession with green energy. Green energy, which is both unreliable, certainly doesn't have the ability to be done without massive fat tax subsidies from consumers, and for which I think our friends in Europe are probably the best ones to explain that after trillions of dollars invested there, it's not worth pursuing. The intention may be right, but the effect is absolutely wrong. And now with countries like throughout Europe, Germany in particular, having to reopen coal plants, one has to ask what the answer will be when countries like Canada, with very large provable reserves, have spent a considerable amount of their time navel gazing and saying no to getting natural gas to other markets, no to pipelines to get our much cleaner slate of oil. And by the way, an oil that's needed now more than ever, because you can't make diesel out of tight, light shale oil in the United States. You make it out of heavy oil, and there's only one country that stands amongst many that can and should be producing and providing, that's Canada. So I think we're seeing a bit of a change in the political climate in this country because of economic necessity. And so the recession, the lack of purchasing power, the higher price for energy leading now to higher prices for foods, as we had predicted here last year, I think is going to force a lot of politicians in this country, those who want to remain, to maybe change their tune, get real, and as it were, wake up and smell the proverbial coffee. Well, Nima, that's it for this week. For the next week, I'm expecting a bit of a turbulence in the market, down a little bit on Sunday. We could see a 7 or 8 cent decrease across the country, but right back up to where we're seeing today, average prices across Canada, about $1.75 to $1.80. And we'll have more for you this time next week. Back to you, Nima.
Well, as always, lots to keep our eyes on. Thanks again for that, Dan. Again, that was Dan McTeague, Senior Petroleum Analyst at GasWizard.ca. He is also the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break. And when we return, we're going to be having our weekly crypto and digital asset update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. And of course, we'll have more news from around the world after that. So stay tuned.